So the Blue Jackets were quiet at the trade deadline today, but did they make the right move for them? We're going to talk about that, plus why I am not worried about the two losses to Tampa Bay and Florida, and why you shouldn't be either. That's all coming up in today's live Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get things started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. I also have to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just go to FanDuel.com to learn more. And same as every live show, I am very bad at talking and also paying attention to other things. So if you have comments, questions, etc., throw them in the chat. The third segment of the episode / live show will get into some of your comments, some of your questions. So if you have thoughts on the trade deadline, if you have thoughts on something else that's going on with the Blue Jackets and, anything like that, throw it in the comments and I will get to it in about 18 minutes or so. But I wanted to start off just by talking about, obviously, the game against Florida wasn't great. I've seen worse efforts from the Blue Jackets, but I've also seen much, much better efforts. I think Elvis was excellent. Everyone else was there, right? Just a really not great effort from a lot of the Blue Jackets. And someone on Twitter actually asked me, is it a lack of effort, or is it just that they were really badly outplayed by a much better team? And honestly, little column A, little column B, right? There's a lot going on. The Panthers are a very good team. They probably got better over the deadline. I don't, off the top of my head, remember who they picked up between the, before / immediately after the game last night. But Panthers are a good team, right? Tampa Bay Lightning are a good team. They immediately, shortly after playing us, they went out and they picked up Yanni Gourde and Oliver Bjorkstrand, so they got better. The Blue Jackets are going to lose to good teams, right? In the same way that the Blue Jackets are going to beat good teams. They're in a really weird spot at the minute where, they're not quite good enough to hold up against, the top of the league, but they're also not bad enough to they're not bad enough anymore to end up getting the benefit of the doubt against teams, right? I feel like early in the season, they beat some really good teams, and part of that was, good play, but I think part of it also was that they took some teams by surprise, right? There are some wins that they had at the beginning of the season that they just fully did not have any business winning, right? I'm thinking especially of probably the first the Colorado game that was second in the season, and then the first Leafs game as well. I feel also arguably the first Oilers game as well, right? There was some games that they had no business winning, and they did. And I think they, teams weren't expecting them. Teams are expecting them now, right? Their reputation in this league has changed. They're not bottom feeders anymore, or they're not this year anyway, and hopefully they won't be for a long time. That means that teams are going to bring their A games, right? I thought Bobrovsky, he didn't have as much to do as Elvis did last night, but I thought Bobrovsky he made some very good saves, right? It was, everyone showed up for the Panthers. Not everyone showed up for the Blue Jackets. And I think that's the difference. Do I think the Panthers are a better team than the Blue Jackets? Yes. But I also think that not a lot of Blue Jackets showed up, right? So that's kind of that was the main problem for me. That being said, I've seen a lot of people, I talked about this a little bit on Twitter earlier, is that I'm seeing people being like, man, these past two games show that the Blue Jackets can't hang with the big dogs during the playoffs. These past two games are proof that we need to go out and buy at the deadline, or they're proof that we need to go out and sell at the deadline, right? And I feel and I am sometimes guilty of this as well. Less so these days, because I think I've kind of broken myself of the habit of there's this weird feeling that if you don't finish bottom 5 of the league and therefore top 5 in the draft lottery, or at the top of your division, then the season is a failure, right? And there's a lot of like, well, if the Blue Jackets can't win a playoff series, then they might as well bail and try and get a better draft pick. And like, honestly, maybe they will miss the playoffs. We don't know. You know, a lot of things are still up in the air, but I don't think that the Blue Jackets getting beaten by two good teams in buildings that are very hard to play in is necessarily like cause for panic, right? Are there some things that worry me about the play? Yes. However, the other thing, and this is kind of the thought process that kind of got me started on this path, is the Blue Jackets lose these games. Okay, fine. The kind of player that they would theoretically add at the deadline is not going to be a player that takes this team over that next step, right? Like they picked Christian Fischer up off of waivers and ended up going and trading a 4th-round pick for Luke Cannon, right? But these moves are both fine by themselves, right? Again, they don't really move the needle, but I wasn't expecting them to. The thing about this is, what could the Blue Jackets have done during this trade deadline to move the needle, right? Don Waddell came out and said, listen, I'm not going to sell. I don't want to take anyone out of this room. I think I owe it to these guys to see how far this group will get me. But at the same time, you don't want to, rob Peter to pay Paul, let's say. You don't want to mortgage the future to potentially win now, especially when you're in a place as kind of fragile as the Blue Jackets, right? They've overachieved this year. I think everyone knows that. There is no guarantee that they will be this good again next year or even take a step forward. Like, obviously, I would love to see them do that, but there is also a chance that they take a step backwards next season. I think we have to kind of be prepared for that. And so it doesn't make sense for Don Waddell to go out and say, right, okay, well, I'm going to give up a 1st-round pick and a prospect to get Scott Lawton, right? I'm going to give up a 2nd-round pick to get Gus Nyquist. It doesn't make sense. Like, they paid, Tampa Bay paid a lot of money to get Yanni Gordon off of Bjorkstrand. I know Bjorkstrand was one of the guys that people were clamoring to have back. I was clamoring to have him back as well. I love him. I miss him. But Don Waddell had a difficult job to do today, which was kind of walk that line between trying to make the team better and also not making the team worse in the future, right? Like, yes, they've got 2 1st-round picks at the minute. Yes, they've got the 1st-round pick next year as well, which is, projected to be a much better draft. But I feel like sometimes people just trade 1st-round picks because it's kind of the done thing to do, right? If you want to get a good player, you trade a 1st-round pick, and it's simply, I don't know. Like, I don't necessarily buy into that, right? It's I get it, I get the urge, but I think Don Waddell made the right decision. And here's the thing, right? Just to kind of go back to what I was talking about in terms of what is the right move for the Blue Jackets and like what will be the best thing for the Blue Jackets to do in the future, right? I'm just pulling up my Twitter thread because I made a good point and I don't remember exactly what the phrasing was. But basically, the idea is, how far can this team go with the players that they have right now? They were never going to get a difference maker in the deadline. I would have loved for them to go after like a Brock Besser, for example. I would happily have traded a 1st-round pick and like, honestly, a 1st-round pick and maybe Caden Lindstrom and maybe like a younger roster player to get Besser with an extension, right? I don't think that you don't want to risk the Mika Rantanen situation happening, but if you can get Besser signed to a reasonable term for the next 8 years, like he scored 40 goals last year. That's a player that I want on my team, right? You could go out and you could pay through the nose for that, but they weren't going to do that. You see how far this group has gone. You see how far they're going to go. You just kind of, again, you're playing with house money. Go till the money runs out. And the money might run out just short of a playoff berth. The money might run out in a 1st-round sweep. But the money might carry you to the 2nd round. Might carry you to the 3rd round. Unlikely, but, might carry you to the Stanley Cup final. You just don't know how far this team can go. but they were never going to be able to build at the deadline this year, especially when it came out. It was a seller's market, right? You look at some of the prices that these players are going for, it didn't make sense to add. And so I get watching these last two games and being worried that the Blue Jackets either need to add much more or they need to sell and commit to not being a playoff team. The Blue Jackets have been good enough this season that I think they would probably have to lose every single game for the rest of the season to get into a favorable draft position, right? And that's simply that's not going to happen, right? So now you have to make a choice. Do you push on, try and make the playoffs and see what happens? Do you try and settle and think, oh, okay, well, I'll draft 12th overall instead of 18th overall? And I think you owe it to this team to want to push, but you also, you don't necessarily want to go and add a bunch of players. And again, something else that Don Waddell talked about was that chemistry is really important. I talked about this a little bit in the little bonus I did after the Cunnin acquisition, which we'll talk about him in a second as well. But I feel like the balance in this locker room is fragile at the minute because of what brought them together, but the Gaudreau situation has created this atmosphere in the room, I feel like. And again, you add something wrong to that mix, the bubble bursts, right? You take away a load-bearing player, the bubble bursts. So I fully understand why Don Waddell did what he did, and I can understand why people are frustrated by it. But to me, again, this was a really difficult line for him to walk, and I think he did about as good of a job as he could have done. There are a couple of comments he made after the deadline officially closed that I want to talk about in a minute because they do concern me a little bit. But I want to take a quick break, and then I want to talk a little bit about Luke Cunnin to the Blue Jackets. Not much. I'm just going to rehash a little bit of what I talked about in the bonus episode earlier today. We'll talk about Don Waddell's post-deadline comments, and then we'll get into some of your comments, questions, etc. I can see there's a couple in the chat at the minute. I haven't opened them because, again, I can't be trusted to talk and do something else at the same time. But take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. First, I'm going to tell you all about FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the games. Even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using their live betting feature. It keeps every moment of the game exciting, whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally, picking a player to hit a clutch three. I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is super easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on your first bet and get $150 in bonus bets if that bet wins. Go to FanDuel.com, find the heaviest favorite you possibly can, put $5 on it. If it wins, you get $150 that you can spend on whatever you want. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. We're going to talk a little bit about Luke Cunnin, which, again, was a trade that I initially was like, why the heck are we getting this guy? Because he doesn't, to my mind, anyway, really add anything for this team. Again, every day, as we'll know, I spend a lot of time watching Sharks hockey. That's my wife's team. That is the team that I see the most because I spend a lot of time in San Jose. Luke Cunnin has not been a particularly exciting player to watch on a miserably bad Sharks team. Putting him on a slightly better team like the Blue Jackets might make him a slightly better player, right? Dean Everson has coached him before. Cunnin was originally a Minnesota draft pick, I believe. Spent some time in Nashville before going to San Jose. So Dean Everson is familiar with him. I will be interested to see if Dean Everson can get something different out of him that a couple of coaches in San Jose have not been able to get. What's interesting is that I didn't realize Luke Cunnin, former 15th overall pick. So something's gone wrong there for this guy. And I'm not suggesting that he's going to magically turn into a 15th overall caliber pick at the Blue Jackets, but my hope and my guess is that he will not be as much of a stone to whatever line he's on as he was in San Jose. And again, I talked to JD Young of Locked On Sharks about it earlier today. And he was like, well, listen, Luke Cunnin was sometimes on the second line in San Jose. Put him as the fourth line wing. That's where he should be, right? That's where you're going to get the most out of him. And it goes back to kind of what I've been saying about some of the depth guys this season, right? Is when you play them at the right position and you play them at the right point in the lineup, you get much more out of them. Like, look how effective Mathieu Olivier has been this season because he's playing less. He's playing a little bit further up the lineup, but he's got different line mates. And also, he's not getting thrown on the ice in every other situation. Like, I feel like every other shift under Vincent, the Corrali, Olivier, Robinson line was taking the ice. And that's simply not conducive to getting the best out of Olivier, right? You limit his ice, you give him slightly softer matchups, and you profit. Cunnin feels like a slightly less effective Mathieu Olivier, right? You're going to get a little bit of offense from him. He's probably not going to win many faceoffs. He'll do some penalty killing, but probably shouldn't do a ton. He is what he is, right? And what he is a fourth line winger that goes to net and likes to hit people. And so I'm sure the fan base will love him. I don't know how effective he'll be on the ice, but he will almost certainly be an upgrade over the fourth line that they have at the minute, which, you know, with LeBanc out for the season, with Puccia down in Cleveland, with Luca Del Bobbelou's down in Cleveland, it looks like that fourth line could be Christian Fischer, Sean Corrali, and Luke Cunnin, which, again, is, no offense to Mikhail Puccia and Joseph Lemay, a big improvement on that line. Like, again, I like Puccia's game a lot. I don't think he's a fourth line type player. I think he's much better playing up the lineup, but there isn't room for him at the minute, so you might as well send him to Cleveland. Joseph Lemay is an AHL player. You replace those two guys with guys like Fischer and Cunnin, you see what you've got there, and it gives you depth as well. That's the other thing. Again, the Blue Jackets, the injury curse continues to lurk, right? Monahan will be back soon. Sillinger will be back soon. Gabranson will be back maybe before playoffs, knock on wood, but I'm not like expecting him back before playoffs. Like, there's, again, a lot of moving parts in the lineup. If someone else gets injured, you've got guys like Cunnin and Fischer that can kind of step in, right? So on the surface, again, I agree with Don Waddell's thought process. I know people are mad that he did too much or mad that he didn't do enough, but I think that he did about the right amount. It's not the player I would have chosen, but the cost was there. And again, we've seen this team work wonders with other teams' cast-offs before, right? He's not going to be a Dante Fabro, but if you can get a little bit more of potential out of Luke Cunnin, that feels like a win, right? The one thing I did want to talk about before I kind of move into like comments, questions, etc. So if you have comments, questions, make sure you throw them in the chat, and I'll get to them in just a minute. Is Don Waddell talked specifically, and this is kind of what I wanted to get into in this little segment type thing. Don Waddell talked about Ivan Provorov. Basically said he talked to their camp. At no point did it really make sense to trade him. However, he is confident that they're going to get a deal done, which I don't know that I feel that great about, right? Like, that feels, I don't know. Maybe it's just me and the fact that I had kind of made my peace with the fact that the Blue Jackets are probably going to move on from him. But I don't see how this makes sense to the team. Provorov is going to want a long deal for a lot of money. You already have Severson taking up a lot of money on the back end. Werenski is taking up a lot of money. That is more deserved. But, like, you're paying Eric Branson still next season. You want, hopefully, to keep Dante Fabro here semi-long term. Then to Matejchuk, you want to keep long term. Like, Jay Christensen is here. It doesn't make sense to lock up a fourth, or I guess a third older defenseman when you have a bunch of guys that hopefully you want to be pushing through the lineup, right? Where's the exact quote here? CBJ GM Don Waddell said he didn't have many serious talks about trading Ivan Provorov. We made a decision to keep Provy, and I've had great conversations with his agent, and I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to get a deal. Now, I am not opposed to Ivan Provorov getting a deal on paper, right? He's been very good for them this year. However, what I would like from Ivan Provorov is a 2-year deal, maybe 3, right? A transitional deal to get the young defenseman through the system. Like, again, Matejchuk has played really well with Provorov. You've got Stanislav Svozil, who, for my mind, is kind of knocking on the door. They're really high on Charlie Ellick. Like, losing Juracek kind of took them back a step, but you've got these guys that you want to try and get into the system, and you want to try and move them up the depth chart, right? Um, I don't know that you can do that if you lock Provorov up long term. The 2-3 years I would be fine with, providing it's not too much money. But anything beyond that, it just kind of feels like you'll have another contract that you're kind of stuck with, a la Damon Severson. So that was kind of a surprising comment from Waddell, like the fact that he's confident that they're going to get a deal done. As far as I was aware, and as far as people had kind of last said, was they're not close, and they're not really getting any closer together. So again, we'll see. But essentially, they have rented Provorov to themselves for the postseason, for the rest of this season and the postseason, and we'll see what goes from there. I'm not expecting any news from that on the new contract front until the summer. I would like to see a Fabro contract get done. My guess is that that's going to be next on the list. I'd like to think that Waddell is going to start working on the Voronkov contract extension, although my guess is that he'll probably get a similar-ish contract to the young guys that signed extensions this past summer. So like something on the lines of, the Sillinger, the Chinikov, the Johnson contract. I don't think he'll get the Marchenko contract yet, but like something along those lines of, between 2 and 3 million for between 2 and 3 years is my kind of guess with Voronkov. So again, there's lots of moving pieces. I don't love the idea of bringing Provorov back, especially because I think he's going to want like 7x7, which is too long and too much money. But we'll see what happens. Nothing like you can't think about it now. Like that is a problem for future Don Waddell, and also a problem for future me to worry about. So I just want to kind of bring that up because I was surprised by that specific wording, especially considering, over the Stadium Series weekend, a lot of stuff came out about all the reporters were like, yeah, we checked in, we talked to a bunch of people, we didn't get the sense that anything was imminent with Provorov. So we'll, I guess we'll circle back to that. But going to take another quick break, and then I've got a couple of comments, questions. I've got one through in my emails as well that I want to get to. So we'll do that in just a second here on Locked On Blue Jackets. Welcome back to Locked On Blue Jackets. A couple of questions. Or a couple of comments, a couple of questions. We'll have some fun in this last segment. Comment from Martin Slezak. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Waddell couldn't outbid Toronto for Carlo, a 6'5" right defenseman who can actually play defense. Really, the Leafs gave up a first-round pick and an extremely good prospect for Brandon Carlo, who I believe is a UFA at the end of this season. Giving up a first-round pick and, so they gave up Fraser Minton, who is one of their more promising prospects. I know that they like him a ton, so I was really shocked that they moved on from him. I'm just pulling up what Carlo's contract is right now. I guess Puckpedia hasn't updated all of the trade deadline stuff yet. Oh, okay. Brandon Carlo is making $4.1 million for the next 3 years. Okay, so Boston retained. Thanks, Martin. You still kind of run into the same issue, right? Of if they want to keep Provorov, then you bring in Carlo, and then suddenly you've got 5 defensemen next season that are signed semi-long term, or 4 in Gabranson, who I suspect they might try and keep Gabranson around for hopefully cheaper than $4 million. But I still feel like a first-round pick and a semi-decent prospect. Like, I'm trying to think who the equivalent is to Fraser Minton. Like, maybe like a James Malatesta level, or potentially even like Luca Del Barbaloos. Like, would you give up a first-round pick and Luca Del Barbaloos for Brandon Carlo? Because I don't know that I would. I am shocked that Boston was willing to trade in division as much as they did this trade deadline. But would I like to have Carlo on the team? Sure, but that price to me is a little bit rich for my taste, and also I think a little bit rich for Don Waddell, who has said if he unless he absolutely had to, he didn't want to trade either of his first round picks, and he probably would have had to give up one of them for Carlo. So I imagine he probably made a he reached out, made a call, but I don't know that they could have matched what Toronto gave up for Brian Carlo. I also probably would give up James Malatesta, but yeah, like if they'd said we'll take a first round pick and Luca Del Boboloos, I would have been like, no, thank you. Which this is not a question that I have, but I keep seeing it pop up on Twitter, and I was going to talk about this and forgot about it. People keep talking about Cole Sillinger as like an extra that they don't need because he's not part of the future because they have Fantilli, Monahan, Jenner, Del Boboloos, and Corrali. Like Boone Jenner is not a center. Boone Jenner should not be a center on this team. He's only a center at the minute because Sillinger is injured and because Monahan is injured. He should go back to the wing as soon as possible. And we absolutely should not trade Sillinger because we have Boone Jenner at center. That shouldn't be how things work, and that's not how things work. The other thing I wanted to talk about is Igor Chinikov really struggled against Florida. I did get a question about this on Twitter, so I wanted to kind of extrapolate on that. I've lost the question because Locked On Every Day is no, I constantly have things open and then lose them. But basically, Igor Chinikov was not great against Florida, and I'm unsurprised by this because what happens when you take an offensive player that's not scoring and you put him on a checking line, he continues to not score. So I don't know why people were surprised by that. Like flipping him and James Van Riemsdyk made no sense to me. I get that they wanted to give James Van Riemsdyk back to Kent Johnson. Those two have really kind of bonded, but putting Igor Chinikov down on that fourth line made absolutely no sense to me. And again, I'm not shocked that he wasn't like super effective. His shot is still great, but that line doesn't create any offense, and so I'm unsurprised that he was unable to create any offense kind of by himself, right? Like just a wild coaching thing. And I have agreed with a lot of Dean Everson's coaching decisions this season. Not all of them, but a lot of them. That was one that I was like, man, that sure is a choice, right? Anyway, one more question here, and then I'm going a little bit long, so we'll wrap it up after that. Unless anyone has any more burning questions that they need to ask me in the next 90 seconds or so. But I got an email from a listener, from a wonderful friend, Anna Shea, who is both a friend and a listener, and who always comes through when I need questions for this kind of thing. Blue Jackets make the playoffs. How far do they get? Here's the thing. It really depends on who they play, right? And the Blue Jackets right now, I believe, are matched up against, I want to say Toronto. I like the Blue Jackets' chances in that situation. Oh, no, excuse me. They would be matched up against the Florida Panthers in that situation, which I like a lot less. So if they face the Panthers in the first round, I don't feel as good as if they were facing the Leafs in the first round, for example. And again, the Blue Jackets currently holding down the first wildcard spot. They are 4 points behind New Jersey, who sit third in the Metro with a game in hand. If the Blue Jackets can overtake the Devils, then they'll have to play Carolina. That also doesn't sound like a lot of fun, right? So theoretically, there are really only, I think, 4 possibilities, maybe 5 possibilities for the Blue Jackets. And that is they finish third in the Metro and end up playing the Carolina Hurricanes. They finish where they are, which is wildcard 1, and have to play one of Florida, Toronto, or Tampa Bay. Or they finish in the second wildcard spot and have to play the Washington Capitals, who I believe the Blue Jackets have played twice this season and lost once in regulation and once in overtime. So, like, I would happily play the Leafs. Probably, I think they could make it into a series versus Tampa Bay. Florida, I think, would be a stretch. They could make it into a series versus Carolina. I think, especially now that Carolina has taken not necessarily like a step back. I don't think they've taken kind of a sideways-ish step, but I like Logan Stankoven a lot. That was the guy that they got the piece back for the Rantanen trade, but he's not Mikko Rantanen yet, right? Will he be one day? Maybe. But Carolina lost Martin Necas for Mikko Rantanen, and then lost Mikko Rantanen for a guy that is not done baking yet. He's a rookie this year, right? I think that the Blue Jackets make that a series. I think that they could win that. I don't think it's likely, but I think they could win that. I don't think they could beat Washington unless Washington remembers that they're all collectively a million years old and they, crumble to dust during the series. Washington's just having a real good season. So mostly my thoughts are probably they wouldn't win a round, but hey, they'd have a lot of fun doing so, and I would have a lot of fun watching, right? Like, it's playoff hockey is fun. Right. And again, I keep going back to the Blue Jackets came into this season with no one expecting anything. Right. I was like, okay, we're going to get 82 games. Maybe 10 of them will be fun. Maybe another 10 will be good. Right. Will they win 30 games? Maybe. I believe they're currently on 30 wins on the season. Yep. They've got 30 wins on the season. Last year, I believe they finished with 27 wins. But I think it'll be fun, right? Getting any kind of bonus hockey after the 82 games is fun, right? It's March 7th and they're playing meaningful hockey. How great is that? Playoff hockey's going to rule, even if they lose the series. It's house money. You go as far as they're going to go, right? And again, that was a comment that that Waddell made as well, which was that he talked to like the leadership group of the Blue Jackets, and one of the players basically texted him and said, we've done it all so far this year, we'll keep doing it. Like, here we go, one reply, we've gotten the team this far, we can get it the rest of the way, just keep on going, right? See how far this team will go, and if how far this team will go is 5 games in the first round, that's 5 extra games that I didn't think we were going to get this season, right? So to kind of wrap up my thought there is, if the Blue Jackets get to play the Leafs, I feel really good about it. If they get to play Florida or Tampa, I don't feel great about it. If they get to play Carolina, I don't feel amazing, but I feel fine about it. And Washington, it really is kind of a toss up. So lots of moving parts. Toronto's the ideal opponent, right? So Toronto, if they could win the Atlantic and the Blue Jackets can finish in the first wildcard spot, I like that series a lot. But lots of hockey to play still before we get there. That's kind of all I've got for today. It's a weekend tomorrow, so no new episode. I will be back on Monday. We'll be talking about the game on Sunday night, which I think is against the Rangers. So we'll talk about that. Hopefully, we'll talk about the good and not as much of the bad or the ugly. But I've been Jay Foster. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, email me at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming to hang out in the chat. I appreciate it when you guys come and give comments, questions, all of that. It makes it more fun for me and hopefully more fun for you guys. So we'll try and do this again sometime soon. But until then, I've been Jay Foster. Thank you once again for listening. And until Monday, make sure you stay locked on.